Hey everybody, it's Julie Stanford Yoga. I'm going to share with you a sequence that is great for correcting an over-exaggerated anterior pelvic tilt. What that means is that instead of having just a really natural curve in your lumbar spine, it's over-exaggerated and the tailbone sticks way back. The belt buckle presses down, so you get this over-exaggerated tilt in the pelvis and the butt sticks out. If you think that you fall into this category, I want to encourage you to do this sequence every day or as much as possible to correct that. We're going to stretch these hip flexor muscles because that type of pelvic tilt will create a lot of tightness here and a lot of weakness in the low back, glutes, and hamstrings. So if you think that you fall into this category, then this is definitely the sequence for you. And it's going to be challenging. So a lot of patience, you can modify as needed. Let's go ahead and get started.
Begin lying on your back with your knees bent and your heels underneath your knees. Arms to the sides, curling your tailbone up. Begin lifting your hips upwards, but don't go too high. Focus on pulling your tailbone up towards your pubic bone, keeping your front ribs drawing in towards your back. Extend your left leg straight. Try to keep your knees in one line. Still focus on curling that tailbone up. Switch to the right leg. Inner thighs engaged, hamstrings engaged. Bringing your right foot back down and curl your back down onto the mat. Roll onto your right side, resting your head on your right arm. Bring your bottom right leg out to the side at a 90-degree bend and grab onto the outer edge of your left foot. Make sure not to arch your back here. This is crucial to getting the proper stretch. As you pull your heel towards your left glute, you should feel the stretch along your left quadricep and towards the left hip flexor. Keep tucking your tailbone under and pulling your navel towards your back. Switch to the other side. Prop yourself up on your arm. Bottom leg will bend out at a 90-degree angle to stabilize yourself as you grab onto the outer right foot. Again, make sure that you are resisting the urge to back bend here. Keep your low back flat, your tailbone tucking under as you work the knee back and heel to glute to stretch the top of that right leg and into your hip flexor. Continuing to breathe normally throughout the stretch. Keep activating your pelvic floor. Releasing onto your belly, elbows underneath your shoulders, palms are flat. Point your toes back and press your belt buckle down onto the mat. Continuing to press the hips down, lift your chest, drop your shoulders down your back, drawing your rib cage forward away from your hips, curling your tailbone down to the floor. Interlace your fingers in between your elbows, come up onto your knees for forearm plank. Pulling your frontal hip points up towards your shoulders so you feel as if your low back is nice and flat. You could hold a glass of water right on your sacrum. If you want to add more strength to this, you can tuck your toes under, lifting your knees. Really over-exaggerate that tucking in the tailbone. An anterior pelvic tilt is going to make your butt want to lift up and your back arch. So you need to really counter balance here, resisting the urge to arch your back. Come onto your knees, reaching your arms behind you, tops of the hands resting right outside of your feet, and release your forehead down to the floor. In this variation of child's pose, we're letting our belly drop on top of the thighs to feel support in the low back. This is a great variation to counterbalance anterior pelvic tilt. Rise up onto your knees, head towards the back of your mat, and roll the mat over and over to create enough cushioning here We're going to come into a hip flexor stretch, and it's really important that the back knee is going to be comfortable. You're going to place your knee right on the mat, bring your right foot forward, 90-degree bend in both legs, and now tuck, tuck, tuck your tailbone. Pull your belly in. Your frontal hip points pull up towards your chest. You'll see I'm even tucking my chin a little bit here to avoid arching the back at all. You can start to sink forward, but make sure you're not arching the back. It's going to be really, really tempting to do that, so you're going to have to really be mindful here. We want to isolate that stretch into the left hip flexor. If you arch the back, you're going to lose that. And you can even use your hands, if you see I'm doing here, to position your pelvis so that your tailbone stays down and tucked under. Switch to the other side, bringing your right knee down, left foot forward. Again, be precise with your bend. We want 90-degree angles in both legs. Use your hands as needed to adjust your pelvis. So we're trying to over-exaggerate for our intention into more of a posterior tilt, just because we're trying to reverse an anterior tilt. So we're doing the opposite. Now, if you were more inclined to be posterior tilted, you would not want to do this. As you sink forward, you're going to feel it just on the front of the right leg. Your low back should not be getting any stretch at all. You're keeping it flat. Release, unrolling your mat. Warrior one, starting with the right foot forward, extending your left foot behind you at a 45-degree end, bending your front thigh until it's about parallel to the floor. Bring your hands to your hips. Adjust yourself. So tailbone, again, tuck it under. Pull your frontal hip points up towards your chest. No arching in your low back. If you have an anterior tilt, you've probably been arching big time every time you do a warrior one. So it's going to feel different, maybe a little bit funky. You can reach your arms up and begin lifting your rib cage away from your hips. Bring your hands in front of your right foot, pick up your back leg, square the hips, and point your left toes down. Slowly lower your left foot, tap it down to the mat for 1, 2, keep that left inner thigh spinning in towards your right. 3, using that hamstring, that glute. 4, pulling the outer right hip back. Bring your thumbs to your heart. Pull your ribs in, stretching your arms forward. Feel your hamstrings activate. Feel your glutes working. Lengthening out of your low back. Keep the tailbone tucked under. Step back into downward facing dog, releasing the crown of your head, tucking your chin, and just let that go. Step your left foot forward, bending your right foot at a 45-degree angle. Bend your front thigh. Reach your hands to your hips. Use your hands to align yourself. We want to be really mindful of our pelvis in every pose. So typically, I tend to arch big time in my low back. If you have an anterior tilt, you've probably been doing that too. So try to get that straight line by pulling your tailbone downwards, lifting the ribs up and away. Pull your frontal hip points up towards your shoulders. Hands come down to the top of your mat. Pick up your back leg. Spiral that right inner thigh in. Flex your right toes down. Tap it to the mat. Pick it back up. Tapping it down for 2. Keep the inner thighs spiraling towards one another. Your low back should feel really nice and flat. And 3, I think, or 4. I'm going to do about 5 of these, or as many as you can handle, just to feel the hamstrings and the glutes really work. And now bring your thumbs to your heart. Feel your low back activate. Reaching your arms forward, pull your ribs in. Try to make a nice straight line, reaching forward and all the way out through your back foot. Bring your palms down to the floor, step back, downward facing dog. Releasing the crown of the head, lengthen and activate your arms, breathe. Lower your knees down to the mat. then straightening your legs behind you. Reach your arms behind you underneath your hips, palms down to the floor. Feel your hip points resting right on top of your wrists. Bring your shoulders forward and down, your chin to the mat. Bending your knees, flex your feet up. Exhale and lift your knees up, feet press up to the sky. Keep pressing your palms down into the mat. You should feel your hips on your wrists the entire time. Really important to keep your chin and your shoulders down and forward as you pulse the feet up. Press it up as if you want to make a footprint up towards the ceiling of the room. We're working the low back, the glutes, and the quad, really isolating here. Your chin never leaves the floor. Keep going, breathing and pulsing. It doesn't matter so much how many you do, just that you're doing it consistently and mindfully. Release your arms to the side, legs straight. Rooting your belt buckle here down onto the floor. So you should feel the front hip points release. And take this into crocodile breath, arms reaching forward, chin on your arms, turn your toes outwards. And let your pelvis ground down into the mat. Pressing your belt buckle down so you can feel the front of the hips get a little bit more space here as the tailbone draws and tucks under. We just keep accentuating more of a posterior tilt because, again, our practice here, the focus is on reversing an anterior tilt. It feels strange at first. Just keep practicing. Downward facing dog. Bring your right knee forward behind your right wrist for half pigeon lunge. Straighten your left leg, pointing your toes to the back of the mat, squaring onto your hips. Draw your outer right hip back. Soften your left hip down. Be careful here not to arch your low back at all. It's going to be really, really tempting. But you're going to need to keep that continued action of tucking your tailbone under and then come down onto your elbows. Spine is nice and long and straight. And for the intention of our practice, you're grounding that back quadricep down, tucking the tailbone under, gently pulling your frontal hip points up towards your chest as you release your belly on top of your right leg. Slow, deep breath throughout the posture. Really important to breathe deeply. Come back up onto your palms. Stay mindful, no arching in your low back as you step back to downward facing dog. Just letting that settle for a moment and switching to the other side. Bringing your left shin forward, lengthening your right leg. So really important to try to sink that right quadricep down to the mat as much as possible. And then avoid arching your back to stay upright. We want to focus on opening up that hip flexor in the back, not arching our back. As you lower down, you can rest right on your elbows. Don't worry about going super low. For the intention of this practice, we want to focus again on curling the tailbone under, lengthening out through your back quadricep. We're opening up that hip flexor muscles more than anything. Breathing deeply. Keep your belly drawing towards your spine. Breath is flowing freely. You could even pause the video and hold these pigeon lunges for longer if you like. When you're ready, rise up onto your palms, stepping your left foot back, downward dog. Come down onto your knees, straightening your legs. Point your toes back, reach your arms out to the side at shoulder height, taking a big inhale through the nose. Exhale, reach back, bend your knees and tap your feet, or at least try. Exhale, tap it back. We're just going to keep going. I do about 20. I'll recommend that you go for 20, but I also want you to feel as if you can handle this. You're not overworked. So feel free to start out slower. Maybe just do 10 for today, and then you can build up. But the point here is to just stay consistent, pressing your pubic bone down every time you lift up and reach back. We're building that strength in the back, in the hamstrings. Keep moving, keep breathing, coming up on those exhales as you reach it back. And that's enough. Come back into your crocodile breath. Toes are turned outwards. As you release your heels and your inner ankles down to the floor, to stretch out the groin, release the hips, pressing your belt buckle down into the mat to feel that nice release here in the frontal hip. Come up onto your elbows, interlace your fingers. We're going to work back into that plank. Building strong upper abdominals is so important here. Again, you can do this on your knees or with your legs straight. This time I'm going to add some oblique work by shimmying my hips back and forth, right to left. So if you can do this comfortably without any achiness in your low back, then I would recommend building that oblique strength. But if it feels funky or not right to you at this moment, feel free to modify as you'd like. And we're just, again, focusing on pulling those frontal hip points up towards the chest so you can feel a really strong core. Releasing your belt buckle back down to the mat. Toes point to the back of the mat, Sphinx pose on the elbows. Press your pubic bone down, turn your fingertips out, this time lifting the elbows, coming into seal. You can walk your palms closer here if you'd like. You can even add a twist if that feels good. You're driving your left palm here down into the mat. Start to bend your right elbow and spin your gaze past your right shoulder. Really important to keep your pubic bone pressing down. It's your anchor. Take your twist onto the other side, driving the right palm into the mat. Little bend in that left arm. Come back to center position. Onto your knees for camel pose. Bring your hands to your sacrum. And you can even use your hands here, adjusting, finding a posterior tilt, which means you're going to tuck the tailbone, pull your frontal hip points up. As you drive the heels of your hands into your sacrum, you're going to press your hips forward, lift your chest up, release your gaze back. It's not important to go back super far in this variation. We want to focus more on opening up the front of the hips. Remember, with an anterior tilt, your hip flexors are going to get really tight. So just keep pressing hips forward. When you're ready, you can come out, lower your butt on your heels, take a few deep breaths, and let your body integrate. Extend your legs forward in front of you, reaching your palms behind you underneath your shoulders. Bend your knees, heels underneath them. Feet are flat. If you want a deeper wrist stretch, you can point your fingers to the back of your mat. Begin pressing your sacrum up. Keep your gaze to your knees until your hips are all the way up. And then if you'd like, you can release your gaze back. Keep pressing the sacrum up towards the front of the hips. Release back down. Come down onto your back, bringing your knees up towards your chest, spreading the legs apart. Grab onto the outer edges of your feet. Happy baby pose. The most important part of this position is to get your sacrum completely flat. The hip flexors are already pretty tight, right? An anterior pelvic tilt. So we want to more open up, press that low back down, and then stretch the legs wide, getting them as straight as you possibly can. Pressing your belly down to the floor. Let your hips open, breathe into the inner thighs. grounding your spine onto the mat. Bring your feet back together. Your elbows lower down to the floor. Bend your knees. And now make a robot arm. So fingers point up, press your elbows down, tuck your tailbone under, and pick up your hips. Reverse crunches here. So you're just gonna curl it up. Use your arms pressing down. You'll see that you work the lower back as well as the upper abdominals here. So regular crunches are the opposite of what we want to do with an anterior pelvic tilt. Instead, focus on these reverse crunches and do as many as you like, plus a few more too, just to challenge yourself. And then release everything onto your mat, soles of the feet together, let your knees open up. Opening up into the front of the hips, eyes closed. Focus on pressing your sacrum all the way down onto the floor. Just let your hips release as you energize into your glutes and your low back. Stay here as long as you'd like, breathing deeply. Feel free to favorite this flow so that you can practice again as many times as you'd like. Thanks for watching. Namaste.